Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are getting into something really fascinating happening in the auto world, specifically with the Chinese EV maker NIO.
Right. They've been running this huge experiment that really challenges the whole idea of car ownership.
Exactly. So our mission is clear. We want to understand how they managed to turn the single most expensive part of an electric car, the battery, into a monthly service.
And not just how, but what are the real benefits, the risks, and, can this thing actually scale outside of China?
It taps right into that consumer trend we see everywhere, doesn't it? This move away from ownership towards, well, using things as a service.
It's the ultimate X as a service model, just applied to cars. NIO's founder was really clear that he wasn't just selling a car, he was selling a whole mobility solution.
So let's start right there, at the core. Battery as a service, or BaaS. The definition sounds simple enough. You just decouple the battery from the car.
It sounds simple, but the implications are just massive.
So walk us through it. What does that first transaction actually look like for a customer?
Okay, so you go to buy an NIO car, and right away you're not paying for the battery. That immediately slashes the upfront price by a huge amount. We're talking around 70,000 Chinese yuan.
Which is what, in US dollars? About 10 grand?
Yeah, somewhere around 10, maybe 11,000 US dollars saved right off the bat. Instead, you just pay a monthly subscription fee.
And that gets you the battery and access to their whole swapping network.
That's the deal.
So that completely changes the business model. It's not a one-time sale anymore.
No, it becomes this long-term recurring revenue stream. It locks the customer into their ecosystem and, in theory, maximizes that customer's lifetime value.
But wait a minute, carrying the cost for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of batteries. I mean, that has to be a crushing weight on NIO's balance sheet, right?
It would be. It absolutely would be. And that's where the real financial innovation comes in.
Okay.
They knew they couldn't just shoulder that cost themselves. So back in August 2020, they partnered with some absolute giants.
Like CATL, the battery maker.
Exactly, CATL, plus some Chinese state funds, and they created a whole separate company, Wuhan Weining Battery Asset Co.
Right, the dedicated asset manager. I think it was capitalized with, what, 800 million RMB?
That's the one. And you should think of it less like a subsidiary and more like a specialized utility company that happens to be off balance sheet.
So Weining buys the batteries.
Weining buys the batteries and then leases them to the customers who subscribe to BaaS. And because NIO didn't have a controlling stake, they effectively pushed that massive asset burden off their own books.
That is incredibly smart. It let them stay nimble while outside capital funded the really heavy, expensive part.
And this structure paid off immediately in another really critical way.
Also,
Policy alignment. In China, by lowering the car's sticker price, NIO's premium cars suddenly qualified for government EV subsidies.
because the car itself, without the battery, was now priced under that 300,000 RMB threshold.
Precisely. But that subsidy was only for cars that use battery swapping.
Wow. So this wasn't just about saving the customer money. It was a regulatory cheat code that put their premium cars on a level playing field with cheaper ones.
A massive strategic advantage right out of the gate.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for the average person thinking about an EV. How does BaaS solve those big three headaches? Sticker price, charging time, and, the fear that your battery will just die in 5 years.
Well, the sticker price is the first and most obvious one. We just covered it. You knock $10,000 off the price. In China, around 2020, that made a premium NIO, something like a BMW or an Audi, suddenly cost about the same upfront as a standard mid-tier gasoline car.
It just changes the entire affordability conversation.
Completely.
But what about the time? The infamous charging time problem.
That's where swapping is just a radical solution. You pull into a station, a robot swaps your empty battery for a full one, and you're out in 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes. I mean, that's often quicker than pumping a tank of gas.
It is. It totally eliminates that I have to wait an hour at a fast charger problem. It makes EV road trips feel normal.
But for that to work, the stations have to be incredibly efficient. What kind of usage are we talking about?
Immense usage. Their newest stations can do up to 408 swaps in a single day.
400? Wow.
And get this. In August 2024, the entire network in China was averaging over 76,000 swaps every single day.
Every day.
That works out to one swap every 1.13 seconds. It's staggering. NIO figured it saved their customers almost 4 hours of charging time a month.
That's a huge quality of life benefit. But let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
I have this fixed monthly fee, right? Around 728 RMB. Isn't that just kicking the can down the road? How is that better than just financing the battery in my loan?
That's the trade-off. But what you're buying with that fee is the removal of long-term risk. Under BaaS, NIO owns the battery. They handle all the maintenance, the health monitoring, and this is the big one, the eventual replacement. You, the consumer, never have to worry about degradation.
So you're basically future-proofed against the battery getting old or a new, better technology coming out.
Exactly, you can just upgrade. Early users who started with a 70 kilowatt-hour pack could just swap up to the 100 kilowatt-hour one when it came out.
And I heard they were even renting out those new 150 kilowatt-hour semi-solid state batteries for long trips.
They were. So you get access to the latest tech without buying a whole new car.
I love that flexibility, the idea that you could just adjust your battery size.
It's so efficient. You use a smaller, cheaper pack for your daily commute. But for that one big road trip a year, you pay a small fee and temporarily swap in a bigger battery.
That ensures the biggest, most resource-intensive batteries are being shared and used, not just sitting idle in someone's garage.
Exactly. And for people in big cities with no place to charge at home, these swap stations become their personal gas stations. NIO's goal for 2025 was to have 90% of its users in China live within 3 kilometers of a station.
That kind of density makes it a real, reliable utility. So we connect this to the bigger picture. What does BaaS really mean for sustainability, for the circular economy?
It changes everything, because by owning the battery, NIO has a direct financial incentive to make it last as long as possible.
Right. They manage it from cradle to grave.
And when a battery degrades below, say, 80% capacity and isn't great for a car anymore, it's not waste.
It goes on to a second life.
A second life, exactly.
Yeah.
They get repurposed for stationary energy storage, for homes, for businesses, or to help balance the electrical grid. It maximizes the value of that asset.
So the battery gets a second career, basically generating revenue outside of the car.
Precisely. And that centralized control also means better care. They're constantly monitoring the battery's health with telematics managing temperature, optimizing charging cycles. That extends its life way beyond what an individual owner might manage.
Okay, what about the grid itself? You always hear that EVs are going to crash the grid when everyone plugs in at 6 p.m.
Well, BaaS can actually be a solution to that. The swap stations are like intelligent energy hubs. They can charge all their spare batteries during off-peak hours, overnight when power is cheap and often greener.
And the stations themselves hold a lot of energy, right?
The new ones hold about 2 megawatt hours. They can act like a distributed energy storage network, a virtual power plant.
So are they actually selling power back to the grid? Is that a real revenue stream yet?
It's in the pilot stage. They're running programs in China, sometimes called reverse swap or V2G, where the station can feed power back to the grid during peak demand to help stabilize it.
It's just a perfect alignment then. NIO's business interest in getting the most value out of the battery lines up perfectly with the environmental interest of recycling and efficiency.
It really operationalizes that idea of extended producer responsibility. They're closing the loop.
Okay, so let's talk viability. It all sounds great, but what about the business itself? Let's look at the numbers. In China, it seems like an undeniable success.
A phenomenal success, yeah. The adoption rate is the proof. Over 70% of new NIO buyers in China choose the BaaS model.
70%.
Yeah.
That is overwhelming.
It's a huge validation from the consumer. And the infrastructure is just massive. They were aiming for over 3,300 swap stations by mid-2025, all supported by government policy. They hit critical mass.
And they manage that capital burn through the asset company and government help. But that potential deal in 2025, with CATL maybe taking a controlling stake in the battery company, that seems like the ultimate validation, doesn't it?
It is. I mean, if the world's biggest battery maker buys in, it's a massive stamp of approval. It validates the whole financial structure and injects the capital they need to keep growing.
And the revenue model keeps getting smarter.
Absolutely. The monthly subscription is the stable backbone. But they're adding things like fees after a certain number of free swaps and even battery buyout options. But here's the really crucial part. NIO Power is becoming an open platform.
What do you mean?
80% of charging sessions on their network are now for non-NIO vehicles.
Wait, really? So they're making money from their rivals' customers?
Yes. The infrastructure itself is becoming a high-utilization business, totally separate from whether they sell an NIO car that day.
Now let's talk about taking this show on the road. When NIO moved into Europe, Norway, Germany, it was a totally different story.
An incredibly challenging transition. It all comes down to a single word: scale.
You need huge sales volume to justify building that expensive network.
And they just don't have it in Europe yet. By early 2025, they had only 59 swap stations across 5 countries.
Good sales numbers.
Tiny. In March 2025, for example, they sold just 86 cars across all 5 of those markets combined.
You can't build a network for 86 cars. The math doesn't work. So what was their pivot? How do they adapt?
They shifted to what you'd call an asset-light strategy. They paused their own big investments and focused everything on partnership and standardization.
Working with companies like Shell, but also with their direct rivals like Geely and Schengen.
Yes, and that's the key. They're trying to create the global standard for swapping.
So they want to become the VHS of battery swapping, forcing everyone else to adopt their format.
That is precisely the ambition. If they can get everyone to use the same size battery pack and connectors, then suddenly the station utilization skyrockets and the whole system becomes viable anywhere. It's the only path forward outside of China.
And the wild thing is, the European customers who did buy one, they loved it.
They did. An amazing 98% of early European users chose BaaS, even with so few stations. They get the value of removing that risk.
But it's not for everyone, it seems. I saw their new entry-level Firefly model in Europe won't have swapping.
Right. It uses a traditional fixed battery. That suggests BaaS really works best for that premium segment where the upfront savings are biggest and customers expect the most convenience.
So to sum this all up, NIO's BaaS is just this compelling, profound example of service-based innovation. It solves real consumer problems, especially in China.
Absolutely. And for it to work globally, it really boils down to 3 things. You need massive scale and utilization. You need smart financial partners.
And you need standardization.
Turning your proprietary tech into an open industry platform.
It really changes the car maker's job, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're not just a manufacturer anymore. They're an energy services company, a utility.
They are. And that leads to a fascinating thought to leave everyone with, especially around the used car market. Given that your battery capacity is always refreshable under BaaS and you, the driver, have zero risk of degradation, what does that do to the resale value of the car? Could a BaaS car actually hold its value better than a regular EV precisely because the battery, the single biggest factor in depreciation, is no longer a variable risk for that next owner? That's the billion-dollar question.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of our Digital Servitization Exchange podcast. We hope the insights sparked new ideas, challenged assumptions, and brought clarity to the evolving world of service and digital-driven business models. This podcast is grounded in extensive research across various fields, drawing on years of academic work, case studies, and cutting-edge publications. It also shaped by hands-on experience of our collaboration partners, whose real-world challenges and successes help us to translate theory into practice. If you enjoyed the episode, consider following the podcast and sharing it with colleagues who are navigating the civilization journey. Your support helps us continuing bridging high-quality research-based and practice-proven perspectives straight to your ears. Thank you for tuning in and see you in the next episode.